Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, Luke writes, he says, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Luke is one of 4 books in the New Testament that we call Gospels. They're accounts of the life of Jesus. And Luke is the one that tells us the most about the birth of Jesus. And here's where Luke kind of begins to tell us the story of exactly what happens. And the story begins when God sends this angel, the word angel means messenger, to this young woman named Mary to let her know that she is going to become a mother. Now, typically we skip right to the details of the mother and all that. But by doing that, we miss a couple really important things that Luke is telling us here that are big deals for the people living in Israel in the first century world. Now, the first part of the Bible, what we call the Old Testament, is essentially the story of Israel, kind of the rise and fall of Israel. And Israel's story as kind of a nation really kind of comes to an end with this event we know as the exile. In the year 586 BCE, Babylon marches into Jerusalem, destroys the temple, destroys Jerusalem, and exiles all of the people. And really that's the end of Israel as an independent nation. Now, sometime later, the exiles are allowed to return home. Some do come back, they rebuild a little bit, but they're never this like thriving independent nation. And toward the end of the Old Testament, after the exile, there's these prophets that show up. Prophets are spokespeople. They speak on behalf of God. These prophets show up and they begin to tell the people, hey, God is not done with Israel. Like, I know things look bad. I know things didn't end the way that we wanted to, but God's not done with Israel. He's going to act. He's going to restore Israel. He's going to rescue his people. He's going to reestablish his kingdom. And they talked about this being the day of the Lord. That's what they would say. The day of the Lord is coming, when God's going to do something. God's going to move. But then the Old Testament ends, the story ends, and there's really silence for about a 400-year period. That's the period of time between the Old and the New Testament. So for 4 centuries, there's been relative silence. People have been waiting for this day of the Lord. They've been waiting for God to do something, but God has been seemingly silent. But into the silence, what Luke tells us is he says, God sent an angel. God sent a messenger. That the silence is finally being broken. That the day of the Lord is here. That God is actually now going to act. That what everyone has been waiting for, now is the time. And so the fact that God is moving, the fact that God is working, this is a big deal for the people of Israel who are living in the first century world now under Roman captivity. And so Luke is telling us, hey, this is God fulfilling his promise. Right? He's out of the ashes of Israel. He's actually going to rescue and restore his people. And he's doing it through a very particular family. He's doing it through the family of King David. And this is hugely important because the way that God was going to rescue his people was through the Messiah, the anointed one, the one that God would send to make everything right. And it was said that the Messiah was going to come from the family of David. And so just in these few little ideas that Luke shares in the beginning, that God has sent, God is working, God is moving. What's going to happen here is because of God. This is God's doing. Everything that's going to unfold from here on out in Jesus' story, his birth and beyond, is because this is what God is doing. And God is doing it through the family of David, who's a part of Israel. So even though Israel at this point in time is not its own independent nation, even though it's still under captivity, God is not finished with Israel. In a sense, what Matthew or what Luke is telling us is that this thing that God is doing through Jesus is connected to what God did through Israel. It's not like God just wiped that away and was like, oh, I messed up there, we got to start all over. No, this new thing is connected to this old thing. That Israel as a nation, right, their hopes and dreams for themselves may have failed with the exile, but God's plans for Israel are not gone. God is not done. God is not defeated. Out of the ashes of Israel, out of the family of King David, God is now going to do something. He's going to move. He's going to act. And it begins with this messenger coming to this young woman and saying, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." Now, this woman, her name is Mary, and at this point, she's engaged to a young man named Joseph. And Luke tells us twice in this short passage that she's a virgin. And this is hugely important to the story. It's why Luke repeats it. If you really want to make your point, you repeat something. Now, engagement in the first century world was a legally binding status. The only way to break off engagement was you would have to go through legal divorce proceedings. But they still were not technically married. They didn't live together. They never slept together. But they are engaged. And so this is really going to be kind of important detail in the story that Luke is going to tell us. So this messenger comes to this young woman named Mary who's engaged to Joseph. And the angel tells her, hey, greetings you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. And Mary kind of right from the beginning suspects that, yeah, there's more to it than that. Like this is a nice greeting, but there's something else in this. Luke goes on. Verse 29 says, Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son. And you are to call him Jesus. And I love that Mary, like, right away senses, like, yeah, there's something wrong here. Like, because if you look at the angel's words, there's nothing wrong with the angel's words. Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you. That's probably what most of us would want to hear. We'd want to hear someone tell us, hey, God likes you. God is pleased with you. God loves you. God, sweet. But Mary's like, yeah, there's something's up. Because as people, we can kind of tell when other people are buttering us up, right? I mean, there's people who are nice just because they're nice, and there's people who are nice because they want something from you. Our family tradition for years over Thanksgiving has been to go visit my wife's family. They live outside of Dallas, and they moved there about 15 years ago. And so we're here at Christmas, and so we go there every Thanksgiving, and it's fun. And one of the things that we do usually when we're in Dallas is right up the road from where my in-laws live, there's a big park. And it has these, a couple big different like jungle gym play areas. And ever since the kids were little, they like to go up there and we play this version of like tag where I'm always it. And if I tag them, they have to go to jail and one of the things and they try to rescue each other. And it's essentially just chaos. And I'm the only adult they've ever been able to sucker into actually going with them. So what happens is the adults will be sitting around, because this is what happens in family holiday celebrations. You segregate generationally. The kids go in one room and do something fun, and the adults sit around and watch football or talk about politics or their ailments or whatever it is they're talking about. And so you always have the adults in the room, and the kids are in the back room doing their thing, and they would always come out into the front room, and they would always say, hey, Dad. And as soon as they said, hey, Dad, I'm like, okay, you want something from me. This isn't, because if you just wanted like, hey, can I get an extra piece of pie, or they would have come in and said, hey, Mom. But when they come in, hey, Dad, I can just tell right away. And the thing about, if you've never been to Dallas, the thing about Dallas is like, it can be 80 degrees one day and then like 37 degrees the next day. And so it just so happens every time they want to go outside and play this tag game, it is like 37 degrees. And so it's warm inside, we have pumpkin pie, we have hot chocolate, and it's like, hey, Dad, do you love us? How much do you love us? Because Dad, we love you. You're our favorite adult, Dad. Why don't you go outside in the freezing cold and play this game with us? And especially as they've gotten older and older, like when they were little, I could run around and catch them. Now, I'm the old guy. They're all like teenagers. I can't even catch them. And still this last Thanksgiving, they're like, come out and play with us. And I'm like, I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to pull a hamstring. I can't catch any of you. But they still come out and, hey, Dad, love you, Dad. Sometimes even they'll like, give you a hug or a kiss, but you can just tell they're buttering you up because they want something. See, Mary's sharp enough to know. Mary at this point, we don't know exactly how old she is, but she's pretty young. She could be 14, 15 years old, but she's smart enough to look at this angel and go, yeah, that's not right. She's troubled. There's something more. And then the angel kind of unveils this plan. The message that this messenger delivers, that God sent this messenger to deliver is, you are going to have a baby, and you are to call him Jesus. Now, Mary, understanding the way biology and reproduction works, asks the follow-up question that is a completely understandable question. Verse 34, how will this be, Mary asked the angel, since I'm a virgin? Remember, Luke's already told us this. Luke's already said, hey, she's a virgin. And Mary asked a follow-up question like, hey, how is this going to go about? Now, when Mary asked this question, I'm sure in Mary's mind, there's a preferred answer. And the answer is something to the extent of, well, after you and Joseph get married, you'll be together, you'll consummate your relationship, you'll become pregnant, and the two of you will raise this child together, and it'll be happily ever after. That's the right answer. But that's not the answer that she's given. Verse 35, the angel answered, the Holy Spirit, literally the presence of God, the presence and the power of God will come on you. The power of the Most High will overshadow you, so the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. And here's the catch. Here's like the thing that Mary was waiting for when she sensed that something was wrong. Well, Mary, to answer your question, this baby will not be Joseph's baby. It will be your baby, Mary. You will carry this baby, you will deliver this baby, but this baby will be conceived through like divine intervention, through miraculous power. You, Mary, are literally going to give birth to the Son of God, to the incarnate God. And I have to imagine that when Mary hears that, her heart just breaks. Because it's like, this is not the plan Mary had for her life. All of us, to some extent, have plans for our life. We all do. When we all look ahead, there's things that we want to have. There's things that we want to see in our life. There's things that we want to see in the people around us, for our spouses, our children, our parents, our brothers and sisters, roommates, whoever it may be. We all make these plans. But then God is always the great disruptor of plans. And this is something that I think we miss. Because especially in like the Western world, like the world that we live in, like the US, Europe, Australia, places like that, we have this kind of view of God that's really shaped by almost like consumer capitalism is essentially what shapes it. That we view God as this being who is there to help me realize my own dreams. That God is basically like the supporting role in my life. That I have these hopes, I have these dreams, I have these ambitions, and as long as they're good and noble, right? Then God is there to help me achieve all the things that I want to achieve. And so we always say, like, I want God to be more present in my life. I want to feel God. I want God to be real in my life. And whenever someone says that, I'll always stop and go, wait a minute, time out. Are you sure that's what you want? I want you to think about this for a minute. Because if Scripture is any indication of who God is and what God does, He's not going to do what you want Him to. He's not going to show up and fulfill your every dream and make your every wish. In fact, what He's most likely going to do is set off a nuclear bomb in the middle of your life and blow it up completely. Because that's what He does. See, in this story, God is not primarily concerned with Mary's situation and circumstances. He's up to something much bigger than that. Now, listen, that is not to say that God doesn't care about Mary's situation and circumstances. He does very much. And in fact, God goes to great lengths to provide for and care for Mary. We're told that when Joseph finds out about this baby, Joseph knows that it's not his, and he doesn't buy the whole miraculous virgin birth thing. He assumes that Mary cheated. He plans to divorce her, leaving her on her own, and that would be disgraceful, and she'd be shunned by her community, likely shunned by her family. God sends another messenger, another angel to Joseph to say, hey, stay with her. Like, she's telling you the truth. She's not lying. So God secures Joseph in her life so that Mary's not alone in all of this. That she has a partner, and together they have God that's with them. So God does go to great lengths to care for Mary and to meet Mary in the midst of her need. But it doesn't change the fact that His primary concern is not her specific circumstances or situation. There's something much bigger that God is up to. There's something God is doing that centers on the person of Jesus, that kind of really transcends individual circumstances and reality. And this is what God is primarily focused on. And if that just so happens to blow up people's hopes and dreams and visions for their own life, well, then so be it. Because the reality is, most of our hopes and dreams and visions for our life don't even really lead to our own thriving and flourishing. We think they will, but they often leave us just as empty as anything else will be. And so God's presence in Mary's life literally just blows her life up. And Mary's forced in this minute to kind of struggle with and think through and process and reconcile, what is she going to do? How is she going to respond? What's going to be her best path forward? And again, remember, this is all happening in the heart and mind and body of a teenage girl, 14-year-old girl. And all of a sudden, her life is no longer her own. She's at the mercy of everyone and everything around her. But the way Mary responds even as vulnerable as she is, she responds with this incredible strength. Because here's what she says. Luke 1:38. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. Then the angel left her. If you're a Beatles fan, the Beatles captured Mary's response perfectly in their song, Let It Be. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me and whispers words of wisdom, let it be. This is Mary's response. Like, okay. God, if this is what you want for whatever reason, I may not like it, I may not agree with it, it may turn my life completely upside down, but let it be. And here's the important thing to understand. And this is hugely important. When Mary says this, when Mary says, I am your servant, may it be as you have said, this is not Mary like surrendering like agency in her life. This is not Mary. Mary at no point from here on out, like she never plays the victim. She never sits there and goes, God totally messed me up and I got hosed by God and this is all. Like she never says that. Mary's act of surrender is completely within her active agency as a person. She doesn't do this because she has to. She doesn't do this because she's required to. She does it because she chooses to. She could have chosen an entirely different posture. I'm not sure she could have chosen whether or not to have the baby. That would have been up to God to decide depending on how Mary responded. But Mary does have the full choice in how she approaches it, how she responds, and how she deals with it. And what she chooses to do is she chooses of her own free will, of her own strength, of her own agency to say, okay, I will do this. I will not fight this. I will go through with this. God, if this is what you want, then this is what I will do. And so this 14-year-old girl shows a tremendous amount of strength that most of us, myself included, probably don't even have. When she says, okay. But the important part of Mary's response is actually rooted in the first sentence where she says, I am the Lord's servant. The reason that Mary can get to that point where she can say, okay, may your word to me be fulfilled. Let it be. God, if this is what you want, then I'm more than willing to go along with it. Is because she recognizes who God is and who she is. And her response is rooted in her trust for God. God, you are God. One of the words we use to talk about God all the time is Lord. The word Lord literally means master. That's what it means. And so Mary, her response is, okay, I may not like this. I may not understand this. Quite frankly, God, I may think this is a stupid idea. But you are Lord, and you are master, and I am your servant, and so I will trust you. So she's not giving up active agency in her life. She's not assuming the place of a victim. She's saying, no, this is what I'm choosing to do because I am choosing in this moment to trust you. Rather than resist you, rather than fight you, rather than trying to be my own master, rather than trying to be my own Lord, I will submit to you as Lord. And I will follow wherever it is that you are leading me. And see, what's fascinating about that is that struggle between like who is in control of our lives. That's really the struggle that's at the heart of the entire biblical story. If you look at the entire biblical story from beginning to end, from Genesis, the first book in the Old Testament, to Revelation, the first book in the New Testament, it is this giant, basically power struggle for who rules all of creation. Who's the master of creation? Who is the Lord of creation? That when God creates the world in Genesis, there's a created order. That creation only exists in an order. Something has to be on top of that order. And that's the question that all of the biblical story is wrestling with, is who's really in charge? Who's really in control? Is it God? Is it humans? Is it Satan? Is it money? Is it greed? Is it pride? Is it any one of these other gods or goddesses? The word that's used to describe this struggle throughout Scripture is idolatry. Idols are whatever we put in that top place. Idols are whatever we put in that number one place that basically is Lord and Master of our life. That's Lord and Master of all creation. And what the biblical story is the biblical story is in the beginning, God rules the heavens and the earth. And he creates human beings and puts human beings on the earth as his image bearers to rule on his behalf. But human beings rebel against that because we don't like to be ruled. We like to rule. So we overthrow God's rule, and that's when heaven and earth get separated, creation falls apart, it becomes chaotic. And the story from then on is this struggle for now who will be the Lord of the earth. And ultimately that story comes to a culmination in Jesus, because Jesus comes to earth as a human being, fully God and fully human, in order to overcome death. Jesus doesn't die to appease an angry God. Jesus is God. He doesn't die to appease himself. He dies because he has to overcome death, because death is really what rules earth. Everything living dies. Jesus, in overcoming death, reclaims earth. And this is why Revelation ends with heaven and earth coming back together and God ruling over heaven and earth. The biblical story is the story of God reclaiming his lordship over heaven and earth. And so our response as people, the way we respond to what the New Testament writers call the gospel, the good news of how God is becoming king through Jesus, right? The way we respond to that, there's a confession that people would use. And in fact, we use it whenever anyone gets baptized. And the confession simply goes that Jesus is Lord. I believe that Jesus is the Christ. I believe that Jesus is my Lord. In the Roman world, everyone believed that Caesar is Lord. That's whatever, Caesar's Lord, Caesar's master, Caesar's in charge. But Christianity comes along and the church has this foundational confession that Jesus is Lord. And so what Mary does here, is so powerful and it's so strong, because what happens in this moment of complete chaos in her life, when God turns her life completely upside down, he just dismantles it. He throws everything into chaos. Mary's response is to recognize that, okay, you're Lord. You're master. Even if I don't like what you do, even if I don't understand it, even if it throws me completely upside down, you are still God, and I am your servant. And so I will follow you. When I was a kid, I liked, at the time it was called WWF, professional wrestling. I wasn't like a huge wrestling fan necessarily, but I liked wrestling. We'd watch wrestling, Saturday night's main event, or, actually went to WrestleMania, I believe it was WrestleMania 12, when it was at the Honda Center, then it was called the Pond, and it was fun. It was kind of a blast. But when I became a youth minister at my home church in Downey is when wrestling was at like the peak of its popularity. Like if you're a wrestling fan at all, it's what's known as like the Attitude Era, and you had all these like big stars, and wrestling made the most money, and they went all over the place. One of the most famous wrestlers during the Attitude Era, who's gone on to, I would argue, even more fame since then, is a guy by the name of Dwayne Johnson. You might know him as The Rock. And that's what he was known as when he was in WWF. He was known as The Rock. Here's a picture of The Rock. This is his. And The Rock, he was fun to watch because he had this larger-than-life personality. He talked about himself in the third person, which is always kind of funny. And he had all these, clever sayings that he would say and all these, clever moves. And when I was the youth minister at the church of Downey, there was a couple guys in my youth group that loved WWF at the time. They absolutely loved it. One guy would pay-per-view order everything, and he'd have parties at his house for WrestleMania or SummerSlam. And whenever wrestling would come to town, he would want to go, but his parents never wanted to take him. So they would buy tickets for me and him and a couple of his friends. They'd be like, hey, can you take these guys? So we would go to these events at Staples Center, and we'd go and we'd just cheer. And again, it was just kind of blast. It was fun at the time. But one of our favorite people we liked to cheer for was we liked to cheer for The Rock. Because again, he was funny. And one of the slogans that The Rock used all the time, and he used it really, really sarcastically. And this slogan was actually the name of his entrance music. If you know anything about wrestling, you know that when wrestlers come down the aisle to go to the ring, they have this entrance music. This slogan that he used was the name of his theme song, and that slogan was, "Know Your Role." And that's what he would tell people. And when people would interview him and they would ask him questions, or when he was trash talking his opponents, he would always just tell them, "Know your role." And the idea behind it was that he was the better one, he was superior. And one of his names for himself is he called himself the Great One. He's like, I'm the Great One. And so the whole idea behind Know Your Role is, hey, when you're in my presence, you need to recognize who I am and who you are, and you need to act accordingly. Now again, when The Rock did it, it was all this character, it was all entertainment, but in a very, very real way, that question is the question behind the entire story of Scripture. Do you and I really know our role? Do we know who we are? Do we know where we fit into this created order? Because again, if you look at Genesis, in Genesis, creation is ordered in a very specific way. And creation exists and thrives only when it's lived within that order. And if that order is violated, then creation implodes. It turns chaotic. It leads to death. It leads to despair. It leads to destruction. And part of the problem, part of the reason you and I get so much trouble is because we end up trying to do something in creation that we were never intended to do. Christmas is a great time of year. It's an awesome time of year. It's also an incredibly stressful time of year. I'm not going to ask you how many of you are stressed because most of us probably are stressed. You got to get everything done. You got to manage everything. You got to make sure everybody's happy. We have so much stress in our lives. And if we're honest with ourselves, so much of our stress in our life results from us trying to control things that we can't control. We're trying to control, can I make this person happy? Can I make that person happy? Can I do this? Can I do that? Can I close this deal? Can I do that? Can I do that? Like, we're trying to do all these things that we can't do, that we were never meant to do. You were never meant to control all these other things. Like again, creation thrives. As human beings, we flourish when we recognize that we are God's image bearers made in his image. He's the king, he's in charge, he's the Lord, he's the master, he controls, and we follow and we trust and we release. We have stress because we're trying to do things that were never ours to do in the first place. Because, in the words of The Rock, we don't know our role. We try to be something. We try to do things that we were never meant to do. See, the beauty of Mary's response, the beauty of her response, is that in that moment, she recognizes who she is and who God is. And her surrender and her submission is an act of her free will, of her trust in God to say, again, I don't get it, I don't understand it, I may not like it, but you are God, and I am your servant. And so I will trust you in this. And then Mary does something that I think is incredible. After she finds all of this out, she ends up leaving town to get away from everything for a while. Like she has to clear her mind, she has to figure out what she's going to do. So she travels quite a great distance to go to her relative, most likely her cousin Elizabeth. She visits Elizabeth. When she knocks on the door, Elizabeth is also pregnant. We talked about Elizabeth last week. Elizabeth is pregnant with a guy by the name of John the Baptist, and they have this really cool encounter. And then when Mary is visiting Elizabeth, she sings this song. It's a worship song. Luke records it for us. It's called the Magnificat. And I just want to read this. And the words are going to appear on the screen. You can either just listen to the words as I read it, or if it's more helpful for you to read, you can read along. I just want you to listen to what Mary says. Again, this is her response now that her life has been turned completely upside down. Here's what she says, Luke 1:46. My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He's brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He's filled the hungry with good things. He's sent the rich away empty. He's helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and to his descendants forever. That's her response, the response of a 14-year-old girl who's about to face all the public shame and ridicule she can, whose life is turned completely upside down. Scholars, when they look at Mary's song, they note that the song is really all about tension and reversal. That it's these tensions we experience in life, and God is reversing all of these different things. But at the heart of this song that Mary sings is the idea of redemption. That God is making all things new. That he's restoring, he's rescuing, he's healing, he's freeing. See, Mary's recognition of who God is also a recognition of what God is doing. That Mary's saying, look, God, I trust you because you are Lord and you are Master. But I also trust you because what you're doing is redeeming and making new all of creation. And I may not be able to see all that, and I may not be able to understand all that. But with everything that is within me, I will willingly submit and surrender because of my trust for you and because of what you are doing. See, Mary's response, the word that we use to label Mary's response is the word worship. And worship's a big, fancy religious word. But the word in the New Testament, the word worship, all it means is to bow before. That's what worship literally means, to bow before. Worship is about, because worship isn't strictly a Christian idea, it's not even strictly a Jewish idea in the Old Testament. Worship is a religious idea that's about giving honor. It's about a devotion. It's about recognizing the greatness of who or whatever it is that you're worshiping. But I love the New Testament idea of worship as bowing before, because worship is really a posture that we take. Most of the time when we talk about worship within the context of the church, we talk about singing. And singing is one of the ways that we worship. It's one of the ways that's most common because music is really at the heart of human emotion. Music, poetry, that's how we express human emotion. Most of us feel human emotions when we sing, and so singing is a way that we express that. But worship is far more than just singing. Worship is this posture that we live in, where we're always recognizing who we are before God and what it is that God is doing. And I love the fact that Mary, in this moment, we don't know this for sure, but I have to imagine that worship is the last thing that Mary wanted to do. That what she wanted to do was scream and shout and punch and hit and kick. But she didn't. What she did was she chose to worship. She chose to take this posture to say, listen, you are God, and I trust you, and I trust what you're doing, even if I don't feel it, even if I can't see it. And so this is the posture that I will take in this moment. And what we learn from Mary in this moment is something that I think is really important. And what we learn from Mary is the times that we need to worship the most are the times that we feel like it the least. Because we equate worship with human emotion, there's times where we're into worship, and there's times we're not into worship. Sometimes I'm just really feeling it today. The music was really great, whatever. Other times you come in, it's like, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm just not, it doesn't resonate with me. Maybe I'm going through a tough time. Maybe I've experienced loss. Maybe I've experienced grief, and I'm just not feeling it. But what Mary shows us is worship's not about feeling. It's about a conscious choice to live with this posture. And when we feel like it the least is when we need to worship the most. Because here's the thing. Our temptation, your temptation, my temptation, always, 100% of the time, is not to be in this posture. Our temptation is to stand up and assume lordship and mastery over our own life. To be in control, to be in charge, to take back the reins. But this is why when you follow Mary's example, and even when you don't feel like it, you assume that posture of worship. In some ways, it's almost more about reminding myself than it is God. Because this is now me willingly saying, no, this is the posture I'm choosing to live with. That you are God, and I am your servant. And so I will trust you. I will trust who you are, and I will trust what you're doing. Even if I can't see it, even if I don't feel it. This is the posture that Mary takes. This is the posture of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Before we get into the heart of the Christmas season, which is over the next couple days, we want to take just a few moments here as we kind of get ready to close out our service over the next 15 minutes or so, and to spend just a few moments worshiping. And we're going to start by taking communion in just a minute. So when you came in, hopefully you got handed a little communion thing with the cup and the wafer. If you didn't get one and you would like to take communion, just raise your hand. We have people coming around who will pass those out to you. Nobody has to take communion, you're not obligated to, but if you would like to and you don't have one, please raise your hand and keep it up high. But we're going to take communion together, and then we're just going to sing 2 more songs. And I know some of you are looking at it going, I got brunch plans to be to, or I got to get home and fix the Christmas lights, or I got to do that. But I want to encourage you. We're talking like 15 minutes here, people, 12 or 15 minutes. None of us are that important. We can wait. We can be here. And we take this time to remind ourselves of who we are, of who God is. And I know not all of us in here are followers of Jesus. Not all of us, and that's totally fine. If you just want to sit through this time and kind of just be in the presence and experience worship, you can. You don't have to sing. You can sit there and just read the lyrics. They'll be on the screen in a minute. That's totally fine. But just take these few moments to be in this place, to be in the presence of God, the disruptor God, the redeeming God, the Lord and King of the world who is making all things new. And he invites us to be a part of what he's doing. If you want, you can go ahead and peel back the top layer, the clear piece of plastic, and take that piece of bread. On the night that he was betrayed, Jesus took the bread and he told his followers, he said, this is my body that's going to be broken for you. I'm going to be crucified. Jesus' death and resurrection are the means by which he overcame death and is making all things new. Jesus says, this is my body that's broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me, to remember who I am and what I've done and what I'm doing. Go ahead and eat that bread. Then you can peel back the next layer. It's the cup of juice. And Jesus said, this is my blood that I'm going to willingly pour out for you. I'm going to give this so that you can live. Blood is the life force of anything. And Jesus gave up his life so that we could have life. So we do this to remember him and who he is and what he's done. Go ahead and drink that. And what I want to do is I want these next 2 songs to be our prayer. We usually close communion by praying together, and there's all different kinds of ways to pray. But I want these songs to be our prayer. I want these to be the moments that we choose to worship. We choose to respond the way that Mary did, recognizing who God is and trusting in who he is and what it is that he's doing. So if you'd like to, I'd like to invite you to stand up, and let's join together as we spend these couple moments just worshiping together as a church family.